I was homeless after my divorce at 68, sleeping in my car with everything I owned in 2 trash bags, until one question changed everything. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Eleanor Whitman. I am 68 years old, and until recently, I believed my life was stable, predictable, and safe. For 41 years, I was married to Richard Whitman. We built a life together, or at least that is what I thought. I trusted him completely. I believed marriage meant fairness, honesty, and protection, especially after spending more than 4 decades side by side. When Richard asked for a divorce, I was shocked but not prepared for what followed. I assumed we would divide things fairly. I assumed the years I spent supporting him, managing the home, and standing by him through hard times would matter. I assumed wrong. The legal papers told a story I had never seen before. Accounts, property, and decisions had been made without my real understanding. On paper, I was left with almost nothing. The day the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse feeling empty. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just numb. I remember holding my purse tightly, as if it was the last thing still mine. I had nowhere to go. The house I once called home was no longer mine. Friends were distant. Family was silent. I didn't want to burden anyone, and honestly, I was too ashamed to explain how bad things really were. That night, I slept in my car. I parked in a quiet area, away from bright lights. Everything I owned was stuffed into 2 trash bags in the back seat. Clothes, papers, small personal items, my entire life reduced to what I could carry. I adjusted the seat, pulled my coat tighter, and tried to pretend it was temporary. But deep down, fear settled in. I kept replaying the same thought in my mind: how did it come to this? After 41 years of marriage, how could I end up here? I thought about all the moments I trusted Richard without question. Every time he told me not to worry. Every time I signed something because he said it was routine. I never imagined those moments would matter more than the years of love I believed we shared. As the night grew colder, I locked my car doors and sat in silence. The street was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I realized I had crossed a line I never thought I would. I was no longer just divorced. I was homeless. Alone. And completely unprepared for what came next. When I look back now, I see how carefully my marriage was built on trust, and how little I questioned it. Richard and I married young. We were not rich, and we did not have an easy start. But we promised to face life together. I believed in that promise for more than 4 decades. Richard's work life was never steady. There were layoffs that came without warning and job changes that forced us to move more than once. Each time, I adjusted without complaint. I took part-time jobs wherever we lived. Sometimes it was retail, sometimes office work, sometimes helping at a local school. I worked when I could and stepped back when the family needed me more at home. It never felt like a sacrifice. It felt like teamwork. When Richard fell ill in his late 40s, I became his caretaker. I drove him to appointments, managed his medications, and made sure the house stayed calm and supportive. I didn't think about money then. I thought about keeping our life stable. He often thanked me and told me he could not have managed without me. Those words meant everything to me. We raised our children together. I handled most of the daily responsibilities. I made sure homework was done, meals were ready, and the house ran smoothly. Richard focused on his career when he could, and I supported that. It made sense to me that he handled the finances. He said it was easier that way. I trusted him. Whenever bills came in or forms needed signatures, Richard would explain just enough to make me comfortable. He would smile and say everything was taken care of. I never felt fear or doubt. We shared dinners, holidays, and quiet evenings that felt safe and normal. Nothing seemed hidden. Nothing felt wrong. I believed that trust was the strongest part of our marriage. I believed love meant not needing to check every detail. I never imagined that the same calm voice that reassured me for years was also keeping me in the dark. I thought transparency would come naturally in a marriage that lasted so long. Looking back, I understand that betrayal does not always come with anger or shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in routine and familiarity. It comes in shared meals, polite conversations, and the belief that someone who has stood beside you for decades would never place you at risk. I believed that with my whole heart. The divorce did not begin with a fight or warning. One day, Richard told me he wanted to move on. His voice was calm, almost polite. I was confused but still believed we would handle things fairly. After all, we had shared a life for decades. I assumed the process would reflect that. Very quickly, I learned how wrong I was. Richard had already prepared everything. Papers arrived that I did not fully understand at first. As meetings and legal discussions continued, the truth slowly came out. Most of the money was not in joint accounts. It was placed in trusts and accounts under Richard's name only. I kept asking how that was possible. I had lived the same life. I had contributed in every way I could. But the documents told a different story. The house hurt the most. I believed it belonged to both of us. I had lived there for years, cared for it, and thought of it as home. Then I discovered it had been refinanced long ago. I remembered signing papers back then, trusting Richard when he said it was just paperwork. I never truly understood what I signed, and now I was paying the price for that trust. Richard's lawyer was sharp and cold. Every meeting felt like a battle I didn't know how to fight. He spoke in legal language that made me feel small and unprepared. My questions were brushed aside. My confusion was treated like weakness. I felt like I was being pushed through a system designed to move quickly, not fairly. I tried to stand up for myself, but I was always one step behind. Richard stayed quiet during most of it, letting his lawyer speak for him. That silence hurt more than shouting would have. It told me he had already emotionally left, long before the papers were filed. When the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courtroom feeling hollow. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shouting. I was simply stunned. I had lost my marriage, my home, and my sense of security in one stroke. What remained was my dignity, but even that felt fragile, like it could break if touched. I stepped outside, holding the paperwork that decided the rest of my life. The future felt unclear and frightening. I had followed the rules, trusted the person I loved, and still ended up with almost nothing. In that moment, I understood that the divorce did not just end my marriage. It erased the life I thought I had. After everything fell apart, I believed at least my children would stand by me. Mark and Susan were grown, with lives of their own, but I had raised them with love and consistency. I had been present for their struggles, their celebrations, and their mistakes. Reaching out to them felt natural. I expected comfort, or at least understanding. At first, they listened. But something felt distant in their voices. They asked questions that didn't sound like concern. They sounded like doubts. Slowly, I realized they had already heard their father's version of the story. He told them I was bad with money. He said I was confused and emotional. He suggested I could not be trusted to handle responsibility anymore. I tried to explain, but my words felt weak against the confidence of his narrative. Mark told me he didn't want to get involved. Susan said she hoped I would get help and learn to be more practical. Those words cut deeper than I expected. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking them to choose sides. I just wanted my children to believe me. Phone calls became shorter. Messages went unanswered. When I suggested meeting in person, there was always an excuse. I felt myself being quietly pushed out of their lives. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow and painful. One unanswered call at a time. The worst part was not the silence itself, but what it meant. I felt erased. As if the years I spent caring for them no longer mattered. As if my role as their mother could be dismissed so easily. I began to question myself. I wondered if I had failed in ways I couldn't see. I realized then that emotional abandonment hurts more than any financial loss. Poverty can be survived. Loneliness feels endless. I could manage without comfort, but being doubted by my own children broke something inside me. It made me feel small and unworthy of protection. I stopped calling after a while. Not because I didn't care, but because the rejection was too heavy to carry. Doors had closed quietly, without explanation or apology. In that silence, I understood that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people you raised, the people you loved the most, and the people you believed would never turn away. The little money I had did not last long. Each day felt like a careful calculation. Gas or food? A warm meal or saving a few dollars for later? I learned quickly how fast stability disappears when there is no safety net. I stopped thinking about comfort and focused only on getting through the day. Living in my car became my routine. I chose quiet places where no one would notice me. I slept lightly, always aware of sounds outside. In the mornings, I folded my coat and tried to make the car look normal, like I was just someone passing through. I didn't want attention. I wanted to disappear. I showered at a community center, keeping my visits short. I avoided eye contact. I dressed neatly but simply, wearing the same clothes again and again. I ate cheap food that filled my stomach but offered no pleasure. I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked older, tired, and smaller than I remembered. Pride kept me quiet. I didn't ask for help. I didn't explain my situation to anyone. I told myself this was temporary, even when I wasn't sure it was true. I felt invisible, like I was moving through the world without being seen. People walked past me without a glance, and I learned how easy it is to become background noise. The public library became my safe place. It was warm, quiet, and free. I could sit for hours without being questioned. I read newspapers slowly, not really absorbing the words. Mostly, I rested. My body was tired, but my mind was even more exhausted. One afternoon, I sat at a table near the window, watching the light shift as the hours passed. I felt worn down, unsure how much longer I could live this way. That's when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two older people were talking softly, not realizing I could hear them. One sentence caught my attention and made me look up. It was nothing dramatic. Just a few words spoken calmly. But something about it made my chest tighten. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small shift inside me, like a door cracking open. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet moment in the library was about to change everything. The man sitting near me noticed my reaction. He was older, with kind eyes and a calm way of speaking. After a moment, he turned and asked if I was all right. I hesitated, unsure whether to respond, but something about his tone felt safe. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure that was true. He introduced himself as Harold Bennett. We spoke quietly, keeping our voices low. I didn't plan to tell him much, but a few words slipped out. I mentioned my divorce and how confused I felt about everything that had happened. I expected sympathy, maybe a polite comment. Instead, he paused and looked at me carefully. Then he asked a simple question. Did you ever sign anything without being explained what it really meant? The question hit me harder than I expected. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't answer right away. My mind went back through years of paperwork, meetings, and signatures. Forms placed in front of me. Explanations that sounded reasonable but never complete. I realized how often I trusted instead of questioning. I finally said yes. More times than I could count. Harold nodded, as if he had expected that answer. He told me he had worked as a legal clerk before retiring. He said he had seen many situations where trust was used as a tool, not a bond. He didn't sound angry. He sounded matter of fact. For the first time, I didn't feel foolish. I felt seen. He explained that signing without full understanding does not mean giving up all rights. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't give false hope. He simply said that truth matters even late in life. That conversation stayed with me long after we parted. I replayed the question over and over. It changed how I saw my past. I stopped blaming myself so harshly. I began to understand that my trust had been taken advantage of, not misplaced by choice. For the first time since everything collapsed, I felt a sense of direction. Not anger. Not revenge driven by cruelty. Something quieter and stronger. A desire to understand what was taken from me and whether it could be made right. That single question planted a seed I could no longer ignore. After that conversation, I started looking at things differently. I gathered every paper I still had. Old folders, envelopes, and documents I had kept without ever truly reading. I spread them out and took my time. There was no rush anymore. I wanted clarity, not comfort. At first, it felt overwhelming. The language was formal and confusing. But I read slowly, line by line. I compared dates, names, and numbers. Patterns began to appear. Accounts that were never mentioned during the divorce. Transfers that didn't make sense. Information that should have been shared but wasn't. The more I read, the clearer it became. Important details were missing from the disclosures. Assets had been moved or placed where I was not informed. I wasn't imagining it. There were real gaps between what I was told and what existed on paper. That realization gave me strength I didn't expect. I didn't feel rage. I felt focus. I began making notes. I organized everything carefully. For the first time in a long while, I felt capable again. I was no longer reacting. I was thinking. Planning. Understanding. Each discovery lifted a little weight from my chest. I had spent so long believing I was careless or incapable. Now I saw the truth more clearly. I had been kept uninformed on purpose. That knowledge didn't crush me. It steadied me. I reached out for proper guidance, prepared and calm. I asked clear questions. I listened carefully. I didn't rush or argue. I simply presented what I had found. People responded differently when they saw I understood the situation. The fear that once followed me began to fade. In its place was determination. Not to punish. Not to humiliate. But to correct what had been wrongfully taken. I wasn't trying to win a battle. I was trying to reclaim balance. For the first time since my life fell apart, I felt grounded. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was informed. And that made all the difference. When the process reopened, the tone changed quickly. This time, I was not confused or silent. I came prepared, with clear records and steady questions. The discussions were no longer one-sided. What had once felt final was now being examined carefully. Richard was confronted with information he hadn't expected me to understand. At first, he tried to stay calm, using the same confident expressions I had known for years. But as more details were reviewed, that confidence began to fade. He avoided eye contact. His answers grew shorter. The truth was no longer hidden behind paperwork. I stayed quiet and focused. I didn't raise my voice or make accusations. I simply stood by the facts. There was no satisfaction in watching his discomfort. I wasn't there for revenge driven by anger. I was there for fairness. As the review continued, assets were reevaluated. Information that had been left out was now brought forward. Decisions were adjusted. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful. Each correction felt like a small step toward balance. Eventually, the outcome changed my life. I was granted proper housing and financial support that reflected my legal rights. Back payments were addressed. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without fear of the next day. Richard said very little by the end. The silence felt different this time. It no longer weakened me. It confirmed that the truth had spoken for itself. I walked away from the process with something more valuable than money. I regained my sense of self. I didn't need applause or acknowledgement. Justice came quietly, but it was strong. And it restored not only my security, but my dignity as well. The truth did not stay contained. Once everything was corrected, the people around Richard began to see what had really happened. The confidence he once carried faded. Conversations became shorter. Invitations stopped coming. He was left alone with the consequences of his choices. No one needed to confront him loudly. The facts did that on their own. Not long after, my children reached out. Their voices sounded different this time. Quieter. Careful. They had learned what had been hidden from me and from them. They said they hadn't known. They said they were sorry. I listened without interrupting. Hearing them admit they were wrong brought relief, but it also brought sadness. The damage was already done. Trust does not return just because the truth comes out. Time and distance had changed things. I was no longer the woman waiting to be believed. I told them I loved them. That part had never changed. But I also made my boundaries clear. I would not pretend the past hadn't hurt me. I would not accept blame for something that was done to me. If they wanted a relationship, it had to be built slowly and honestly. They struggled with that at first. They wanted things to go back to how they were. I understood the desire, but I couldn't allow it. Self-respect mattered more than comfort. I had learned that the hard way. Forgiveness became a quiet process. It was not something I gave freely or quickly. It was something I considered carefully. I allowed space for conversation, but not control. I allowed love, but not dismissal. Choosing myself felt strange at first. But it also felt right. I wasn't closing the door completely. I was simply deciding who had the key. That choice gave me peace. For the first time, my life felt balanced, not because others approved, but because I respected myself enough to stand firm. After everything was settled, I found a small, quiet house that felt safe. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I arranged my things slowly, taking time to make it feel like home again. The walls were bare at first, but I filled them with memories that mattered to me. Each corner reminded me I had regained control of my life. I spent mornings sitting by the window, drinking coffee and watching the world move outside. The house felt calm, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I didn't need wealth or luxury to feel secure. I needed honesty, stability, and a sense of self-worth. Those were the things I had finally reclaimed. Sometimes I still think about how betrayal nearly erased everything I had worked for. The years of trust, the devotion to family, the belief in fairness, all of it seemed meaningless at one point. But truth restored me. Slowly, quietly, it rebuilt me from the inside. I realized that pain could teach as much as it hurt. I learned that standing firm and seeking the facts mattered more than holding on to anger. I also understood something about love. Real love does not hide things. Real love does not manipulate or take advantage of trust. Real love includes honesty, transparency, and respect. That lesson was hard, but it was clear now. I would never again allow someone else to define my life through lies or omissions. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Richard, about Mark and Susan, and about all that I went through. I feel compassion, but I no longer feel powerless. My life is mine. My decisions are mine. My home, my routines, my peace, all of it belongs to me now. And I remember the question that changed everything: did you ever sign anything without being explained what it really meant? It is simple, yet powerful. I repeat it quietly to myself often. I hope others will ask it sooner than I did. It can open eyes, reveal truth, and protect people from mistakes they don't even know they are making. Sitting in my small living room, I smile sometimes, not because of revenge, not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I survived. I endured. I learned. I reclaimed what was mine, and I did it with calm, with patience, and with dignity. My life feels steady now, even if it is not perfect. I finally understand that victory does not always roar. Sometimes victory is quiet, slow, and lasting. It comes from knowing your worth, protecting yourself, and never losing sight of the truth. That is the life I now live, and it is enough.